Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving headfirst into one of the most legendary financial frenzies of all time. We're talking about the Dutch Tulip Mania.
All right, let's kick things off with something that just sounds insane. Picture this. Back in the 1630s, in Holland, a single flower bulb, yeah, just the bulb, not even the flower, could cost you more than 10 times what a skilled worker made in an entire year. We're not exaggerating here. Some of these bulbs were going for the price of a fancy house in Amsterdam.
So that just begs the question, right? Was this really the greatest financial madness in history, or is the real story something completely different? That's what we're going to get into today. We'll unpack the legend, the science behind it, and what really happened. Okay, so first things first, we've got to start with the legend, the story that's been told for almost 400 years. You know, the one about the first great bubble.
People at the time were definitely making fun of it. I mean, look at this. This is a real painting from the 1640s. It shows monkeys dressed up in fancy Dutch clothes, all trading tulips. You've got them weighing bulbs, counting coins, and one is even getting carried to its grave after losing everything. The commentary is pretty brutal, right? It's basically saying the speculators were just a bunch of mindless animals.
So this popular legend, it really got cemented in our minds by a Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay back in 1841. And the picture he painted, absolute chaos. We're talking fortunes won and lost overnight, the entire country supposedly gripped by the speculative fever. Mackay claimed everyone was in on it, from the super rich down to the chimney sweeps, and they were all getting ruined. He even wrote about a single bulb, the Semper Augustus, being offered for 12 acres of land. The story goes that when it all came crashing down, the whole Dutch economy went with it.
But okay, let's pause for a second. To really figure this out, you have to ask a pretty basic question. Why? Why was a simple flower worth so much money? Well, the secret is actually a beautiful virus.
Yeah, you heard that right. The most valuable tulips, the ones people were going crazy for, were actually sick. They were infected with something called the tulip-breaking virus. Now, the growers back then had no idea what was causing it, but this virus would break the tulip's color, creating these incredible, dramatic, flame-like patterns on the petals. They were absolutely gorgeous.
And this virus, it created the perfect storm for a luxury good. Think about it. First, it made these stunning, totally unique patterns that you just couldn't reliably reproduce. Every single one was a one-of-a-kind piece of natural art. But there's a catch. The virus also weakened the bulb over time. This meant that these beautiful, infected bulbs were incredibly rare and perishable. It's like the ultimate limited edition item.
So, as you can imagine, the prices for these rare, broken tulips just went through the roof. At the absolute peak, one Viceroy tulip bulb was going for 3,000 guilders. Now, 3,000 guilders, that probably doesn't mean much to you. So to put that into perspective,
For the price of that one single bulb, you could have bought 4 fat oxen, 8 fat pigs, a dozen sheep, barrels and barrels of wine and beer, 1,000 pounds of cheese. I mean, look at this list. You could get a whole bed, a new suit, and a silver cup. All of that for one flower bulb. It's just an incredible amount of wealth tied up in something that you stick in the dirt.
now here's where things get really interesting. It wasn't just the beauty and rarity of the tulips that fueled this. The way people were trading them poured gasoline on the fire. The market became less about the actual flowers and more about paper. They had a great name for it in Dutch, windhandel, which literally means wind trade. See, at the peak of all this, during the winter of 1636 to 37, nobody was actually trading bulbs. The bulbs were all safe and sound in the ground. What they were trading were futures contracts. Basically little slips of paper that gave you the right to buy a tulip bulb in the spring for a price you agreed on now. It was one of the world's very first futures markets.
So here's how it worked. A seller who has a bulb planted in their garden signs a note promising to deliver it to a buyer in the spring. That buyer agrees to pay a set price when they get it. But that buyer doesn't have to wait. They can turn around and sell that promise, that piece of paper, to someone else for a bit more money, and so on and so on. The key thing here is that no actual money or bulbs changed hands until the springtime. It made speculation super fast and easy because you didn't need a huge pile of cash up front.
But you know how this works, right? A market built purely on promises and the idea that prices will just keep going up forever, well, that's not exactly stable. It can't last, and it was only a matter of time before the whole thing came crashing down. And when the crash came, it came fast. It all started in early February of 1637. Prices had been skyrocketing, but then, at a tulip auction in Harlem, nobody showed up. No buyers. Crickets. That news spread like wildfire, and boom, panic. All of a sudden, those paper contracts that were worth a fortune were just worthless pieces of paper. The confidence that held the whole market up just vanished almost overnight.
So what happened to all those contracts? Well, after months of total chaos, the government basically gave up trying to enforce them. They came up with a solution called rouwkoop, which translates to grieving money. Basically, buyers could get out of their contracts by paying a tiny penalty, usually around 3.5% of the original price. So people who had promised to pay a fortune just paid a tiny fee and walked away, while the sellers were left holding a bunch of tulips they couldn't sell.
Okay, so that's the dramatic legend of the crash. But here's where the story takes a turn. Modern historians like Anne Goldgar started digging into the actual records from the time. Court documents, notary papers, that kind of thing. And what they found, well, it changes pretty much everything we thought we knew. When you put the legends side by side with what the historical records actually say, the difference is just staggering. A national economic crisis? Nope, doesn't seem to have had a big effect on the Dutch economy at all. Thousands of people bankrupted? Researchers have found very, very few bankruptcies that can be blamed only on tulips. And this idea of mass hysteria with everyone involved? The reality is it was a pretty small group of people, mostly well-off merchants and artisans. It wasn't the whole country. So it turns out, this wasn't really irrational madness. As historian Anne Goldgar points out, you have to remember the context. This was a really wealthy society, and tulips were this brand new, exotic luxury item. It's not totally crazy to pay a high price for something you think is valuable, especially if you think someone else will pay even more for it tomorrow. It was a risky game for sure, but maybe not insane. So, this leads to the big question, right? If the story of a huge national disaster is mostly just an exaggeration, why does it stick around? Why do we all know the story of Tulip Mania?
Well, the answer is pretty simple. The legend persists because it's just a great story. It's a perfect, simple, cautionary tale about greed. That book from 1841 really sealed the deal, turning it into this epic drama. And now the term tulip mania is just a super useful metaphor we use for any speculative bubble. Let's be honest, the story of a whole country being ruined by a flower is way more exciting than a contained market correction among a few rich guys, right?
Which leaves us with a final, kind of ironic thought. The story of Tulip Mania is this powerful legend about a bubble. But what if the real bubble wasn't the flower at all, but the story itself? A story that's been inflated and passed down for centuries, and still pays dividends today as a timeless lesson in human folly, whether it's entirely true or not.